The envelope never arrived. Not in the mail, not by courier, not even by mistake in the neighbor's box. I knew because I checked every morning for a week, pretending it didn't matter. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, so you never miss a story like this one. The newspapers had already written about the Cole Initiative Gala, a lavish evening at the downtown Marriott, where my daughter Isabel was being honored for her philanthropic excellence. Her smiling face filled the society pages, pearls, polished speeches, perfect posture. Not once did she mention her father, the man who built the first model for that very foundation in his small home workshop. I read the article twice, then folded it carefully, like it might shatter if handled wrong. 68 years old, widower, retired architect, apparently invisible too. When you spend your life building things, you learn one truth early. What you make can outgrow you. Still, I never thought the building that carried my wife's dream would forget the hands that drew its first line. By dusk, the city glowed with that kind of winter light that looks expensive. Reflections off glass, champagne air. I shaved, put on my oldest black suit, and drove downtown. The valet looked at me like I'd taken a wrong turn from a church basement. Inside, violins, gold drapery, people who smiled with their teeth first. The sign above the ballroom read, "The Cole Initiative Annual Gala, hosted by Isabel Cole." My daughter's name in gold. My stomach turned in iron. I found a seat near the back, close enough to see her, but far enough to pretend I was a stranger. She floated through the crowd, a host in silk, all warmth and performance. When her eyes finally met mine, something flickered. Recognition, guilt, then calculation. She walked toward me slowly, smile glued in place. "Good evening," she said, voice loud enough for nearby donors to hear. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" The air left my lungs before I could answer. A waiter passed between us, carrying glasses that clinked like small, cruel laughs. I looked at her, my own daughter, pretending not to know me in front of her guests. And all I could think of was her mother's face the day we built her first art desk together. Helen had said, "Let her build something honest." I stood, straightened my coat, and without another word, I walked out. Outside, the night was colder than before. Snow fell in lazy spirals, catching the city lights. Somewhere behind me, the applause began, muffled through glass, hollow through memory. I walked to the car slowly, each step heavier than the last, my breath ghosting in front of me like something escaping. When I reached the parking lot, I saw my reflection in the window. Suit wrinkled, eyes tired, posture still proud. I whispered into the dark, "You don't need an invitation to your own story." And that was the moment something inside me shifted. Quiet, deliberate, like a beam settling under new weight. I didn't know it yet, but that humiliation would become the blueprint of everything that came next. I didn't sleep that night. The sound of the city outside my window felt too loud, too alive, like a world that had already moved on without me. Inside, the house was silent, the kind of silence that feels earned and punishing. The old drafting table sat by the window, still covered in the blueprints I hadn't touched in months. Lines, measurements, margins, the language of a man who built certainty into uncertain things. I ran my hand over the paper, tracing the same corner Helen used to rest her tea mug on while watching me draw. She used to say, "Ray, you don't build walls to keep the world out. You build them to hold something worth keeping inside." That memory landed like a nail through soft wood. Quiet. Final. I took a deep breath, but it came out uneven. On the work table beside the plans was a photo of the three of us, Helen, Isabel, and me, standing in front of the half-finished community center. Isabel couldn't have been more than 10, holding a paint roller twice her height, cheeks smudged with color. Helen was laughing, sunlight caught in her hair. That photo was taken the same day she said, "Someday this building will belong to her." I guess it did, just not in the way we imagined. I sat down, the chair creaking under my weight, and unfolded the original layout for what became the Cole Initiative. Back then, it wasn't a foundation. It was a dream we built with savings, sweat, and borrowed time. I still remember pouring concrete with a broken wrist, Helen mixing the cement herself. She refused to stay home, even when her cough had started. By the time the building was done, she was already fading. Cancer, the cruelest blueprint of all. After she passed, Isabel threw herself into honoring Mom's legacy. She started the charity with my support, my seed money, my contacts. I didn't mind. It felt right, but little by little, the work became something shinier. Press conferences, sponsorship dinners, social circles that spoke in donations instead of words. Helen's dream of helping quietly turned into Isabel's empire of being seen helping. The difference, I learned, was everything. That night, I unfolded one of the newer brochures from the foundation. Isabel's face again, flawless, detached. The slogan beneath it read, "Building a Better Tomorrow." The irony burned. I took out my old pencil, the one Helen gave me before our wedding, and circled the words. Then I wrote beneath it, small but firm, "Better begins with truth." I stared at it for a long time. That's when the phone buzzed, a message from George Halbrook. "Ray, I heard about what happened tonight. Don't let her shame you. Call me in the morning." George had been my accountant and friend for 40 years. A man who never sugar-coated numbers or people. His message didn't sound like pity, it sounded like permission. I didn't call him, not yet. Instead, I opened the drawer beneath the drafting table and pulled out the old metal box Helen used for receipts and building permits. Inside were decades of files, tax slips, donor notes, contracts, all tied to the Cole Initiative's early days. I flipped through the pages slowly. Names of contractors, suppliers, and benefactors stared back. One document caught my eye, a promissory note from the Foundation's earliest years, signed by Nathan Ellery, a personal guarantee for a property loan, paid off suspiciously fast. Strange. Nathan had no money back then. I remembered covering a few expenses myself, just to get the foundation off the ground. But this document showed otherwise. Someone had rewritten history. The ghost of Helen's voice came again. "Ray, buildings talk if you listen." I smiled sadly. "Then let's listen, sweetheart." I stacked the files neatly, each one a brick and something new. Not revenge, not anger, but truth. The kind that stands long after applause fades. Outside, the wind pressed against the window, and somewhere in the dark, a church bell struck midnight. The sound reminded me of the night Helen and I finished our first project together. Tired, broke, but proud. Back then, pride meant survival. Now it meant something else entirely. I turned off the light, leaving only the lamp's glow over the blueprints. Shadows crossed the lines, soft and imperfect, like fingerprints on glass. For the first time since that disastrous gala, I felt something close to direction. Not rage, not despair, just clarity. Tomorrow, I'd call George, and maybe, just maybe, start drawing again. It started raining before dawn, the kind of steady silver rain that makes the city look like it's dissolving. I hadn't meant to go out that morning, but the walls of the house felt too small, too full of memory. So I took my umbrella, the one Helen used to call our traveling roof, and stepped outside. The air smelled like wet asphalt and beginnings. The streets were half empty, the way cities only are before breakfast. Every drop on my coat reminded me of the night I walked away from Isabel's gala. Same weight, different resolve. I didn't have a destination in mind, but my feet found one anyway. 2 miles from home stood the first building Helen and I ever designed together, a small brick schoolhouse on the east side, still standing after 40 years. I built its foundation myself. Back then, we'd written our initials in the cornerstone, R plus. Build with love. Now the letters were barely visible, worn down by rain and time. I knelt beside it, touched the cold surface, and whispered, "Still standing?" A voice came from behind me. "You built this, didn't you?" I turned. A young man, maybe 30, stood under the awning, holding a coffee cup and wearing a janitor's jacket. "I did," I said. He nodded. "My mom says this place saved her when she was a kid. The charity you started with your wife paid for her books." I smiled faintly. "That wasn't me alone. It was my wife's idea." "She must have been something," he said. "She was everything." He hesitated, then added, "People still talk about her name. Helen Cole. The foundation used to send volunteers here all the time, before things changed." "Changed?" I asked. He shrugged. "Fewer visits, fewer programs. Everything looks richer on paper than it does here now." That line stayed with me long after he went inside. Richer on paper, poorer in truth. I kept walking until I reached the downtown district, the part of the city where the glass buildings looked like they'd been designed to forget who built them. From across the street, I saw it. The Cole Initiative headquarters. 4 stories of polished marble, banners fluttering, security at the door. Isabel's empire gleaming like gilt under the rain. For a long minute, I just watched. People walked in and out. Interns, assistants, donors with umbrellas that probably cost more than my old truck. And me, standing there like a ghost outside my own legacy. Then something caught my eye. A delivery van pulled up, unloading crates labeled Event Decor, Premier Lighting Co. I knew that company. It wasn't registered to Isabel's charity. It belonged to Nathan Ellery. I'd seen the name on old invoices years ago. The dots began connecting themselves, quiet and deliberate. I crossed the street, walked right up to the glass door. The security guard gave me the professional smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Morning, sir. Are you expected?" "Not anymore," I said, then turned away before he could respond. The reflection in the door showed me what I'd become. An old man with rain in his hair, still standing straighter than the tower that tried to erase him. Back at home, I hung my coat by the door and sat down at the drafting table again. The photo of Helen and Isabel smiled back at me. I took out a notebook, drew 2 columns, and wrote at the top, what she built and what it became. Under the first, I wrote, free tutoring for low-income kids. After-school art programs, housing design for seniors. Under the second, corporate sponsorship dinners, gala partnerships, Premier Lighting Co. I stared at the difference. The handwriting didn't look like mine anymore. The rain outside slowed to a whisper. When it finally stopped, the light that came through the window looked clearer, like the world was waiting for me to move. I called George Halbrook. He answered on the first ring. "Ray," he said, "you sound awake." "I am," I told him. "I need your help. Something's wrong with the foundation." "I figured," he said calmly. "You ready to dig?" "I've been digging all my life, George. I just didn't realize what I was unearthing." "Come by tomorrow," he said. "Bring every file you have." When I hung up, I looked once more at the faded blueprint of that old community center. The edges were torn, coffee-stained, but the structure was still sound. So was I. And for the first time since Helen's passing, I knew what to build next. Not walls, not bridges. Truth. Morning light slid through the blinds, carving pale lines across the floor like unfinished blueprints. I hadn't slept much. The files I'd gone through the night before were spread across the dining table. Columns of dates, signatures, and invoices that didn't match. When Helen and I built our first community project, she used to say, "If something looks too perfect, it's probably hiding cracks." The Cole Initiative looked flawless on paper. That alone made me suspicious. I arrived at the foundation building just before noon. The place was all glass, walls so transparent they dared you to believe nothing was being hidden. I knew better. Transparency was the easiest way to disguise emptiness. The receptionist smiled professionally. "Good afternoon, sir. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, but I was hoping to volunteer. I heard the foundation supports community design projects. Her smile faltered just a little. We don't usually handle walk-ins, but... Raymond Cole, I said, offering my hand. You might recognize the name. Her eyes widened. The politeness in her voice sharpened into confusion. Mr. Cole, One moment, please. She disappeared down a hallway. A few minutes later, a woman stepped out of a side office. Mid-40s, dark hair tied neatly, eyes that saw more than they said. She extended her hand firmly. Megan Shaw, she said. I handle operations here. Would you like to come in? Her office was modest, framed certificates, architectural sketches on the wall, and a single plant that looked like it had been cared for too much. She gestured toward a chair. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Neither was my daughter, I said. She smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but recognition. I heard about the gala. Everyone did, I said. I'm just here to see what she's built. Megan studied me for a moment. Then she opened a folder on her desk, flipping through pages like someone testing trust. You were the original benefactor, she said. Your name's on the founding papers, though it doesn't appear in any of the public documents now. That's how she wanted it, I replied. She hesitated, then said quietly, Not everyone here agrees with how things are run, Mr. Cole. That sentence hung in the air like a doorway half open. I leaned forward. Go on. There are expenses that don't add up, she said. Accounts moved between shell companies, vendors that exist only on paper. I've been trying to raise questions, but... She trailed off. But Isabel runs the board, I finished. Yes. And Nathan Ellery handles most of the financial approvals. Nothing leaves his desk without his signature. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger yet, but recognition. The kind you feel when you see a structure you once trusted start to buckle. Megan slid a sheet of paper across the desk. These are recent transactions for the upcoming expansion project. You'll see a vendor called Premier Lighting Co. The payments look routine, but the address traces back to an office suite Nathan owns. I scanned the page. The numbers were neat, deliberate, the precision of someone who understood how to hide. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because I've been working here long enough to know when something's being buried, she said. And because Helen's name still hangs on the lobby wall. Some of us still care what it means. Her voice cracked slightly at the edges. Not rehearsed, not strategic, just honest. It had been years since anyone had spoken my wife's name in that building without agenda. I folded the paper carefully as if it were fragile. Thank you, Ms. Shaw. She gave a small nod. If you're planning to act, do it quietly. Isabel doesn't like surprises. Neither do I said. But I've lived through worse. When I left her office, the hallway lights reflected across the polished floor like ripples of glass. People moved briskly, holding clipboards, talking in corporate tones. None of them looked like they knew what Helen's dream had been, the small community workshop, the open-door classroom, the quiet service without cameras. In the lobby, I paused beneath the foundation's wall display, the Cole Initiative, Building Hope. Since 1991. Beside it, a bronze plaque with Helen's name. The metal was smudged from fingerprints, or maybe from people trying not to look too long. I wiped the dust away with my sleeve, leaving the surface clean. Still here, Helen, I whispered. They just forgot what you built. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air smelled like it could start again. I walked 2 blocks before calling George. Tell me you found something, he said. I did, I said, and I found someone who still remembers why it mattered. Good. Bring it all over. Let's start tracing the money trail. Tomorrow morning, I said. Tonight, I need to think. Ray, George said. You're not thinking revenge, are you? No, I said quietly. I'm thinking restoration. When I hung up, I looked up at the building one last time. The glass reflected the sky perfectly. Too perfectly. You couldn't see what was inside. But I knew. And soon, so would everyone else. George's house smelled like old books and rain. He lived above his accounting office, a 2-story brick building that hadn't changed in 30 years. Same leather chair, same ticking clock, same neat rows of binders arranged by year and dust. "You always said numbers don't lie," I told him. He smiled, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "They don't, but people sure do." We sat across from each other at the worn mahogany desk that had seen every one of his clients' confessions. I slid the papers Megan had given me across the table. He adjusted his glasses and started reading. He said after a while. "Shell vendor. Classic misdirection." He pointed to one line item. "Premier Lighting Co., registered to Ellery Holdings, LLC. And Ellery Holdings is owned by—" He flipped another page. "Surprise, surprise, the Coal Initiative's PR partner. They're paying themselves to look good." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "How deep do you think this goes?" "Deep enough that your daughter either doesn't know or doesn't care," George said. "My guess? Nathan built her a kingdom of glass. Pretty from the street, empty inside." I didn't answer. The words, "your daughter," carried a weight that didn't settle easily. He set down the papers. "You realize, Ray, if we expose this publicly, it'll bury her." "I don't want her buried," I said quietly. "I just want her awake." George nodded, a small flicker of admiration crossing his face. "That's the kind of vengeance I can get behind." He pulled a yellow pad closer, jotting notes in his steady accountant's script. "The foundation's debt is consolidated under a single lender, Halverson Financial Group. Looks like they financed the last 2 expansion projects." "I know them," I said. "They built the east wing of the library we did years ago. Reliable, but they hate late payments." George flipped through more pages. "They've been threatening foreclosure. If you acquire that debt—" "I control the foundation," I finished. He met my eyes. "Exactly." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked between us like a metronome marking hesitation. Finally, I said, "What would it take?" "Half your savings, maybe more. It's a risk." I smiled faintly. "I built roofs in the rain, George. I can handle risk." He chuckled. "That you did? And you always kept your blueprints dry." We spent hours tracing accounts, checking filings, mapping the financial architecture of deceit. Every false invoice and forged statement felt like another crack in a house I'd once called family. At one point, George looked up and said, "You're quiet." "I'm thinking of Helen," I said. "She used to say truth doesn't need volume, just structure. Smart woman, the smartest." By evening, we had a plan. I'd meet the lender quietly, make an offer through a holding company under my name, and acquire all active debts tied to the Coal Initiative. No press, no confrontation, just one quiet move in a city built on noise. Before I left, George handed me a folder. "This will cover you legally. And Ray, when you do this, don't tell Megan yet. She's honest, but too close to the line. You'll need deniability." "Understood." As I stood to leave, he added softly, "You sure this isn't revenge?" I turned back. "If it were, I'd want her to see me coming." "This isn't that." He nodded slowly. "Then build carefully, my friend. Foundations that start with anger collapse fast." Outside, the rain had started again, thin, persistent, whispering against the streetlights. I walked down the narrow road, passing the diner where Helen and I used to stop for pie after long design days. The neon flickered in the window, spelling only half the word open. I smiled. That felt about right. Back home, I sat at the drafting table once more. The house was dark except for the lamp's soft circle of light. On the table lay Helen's wedding ring. I'd kept it there since she passed. I picked it up, turned it in my fingers, and whispered, "You said to build with love. I'm trying, Helen, even now." I placed the ring beside the newest blueprint, not for a building, but for an act of restoration. Tomorrow, the first call would go out, quietly, professionally, legally. The house may have forgotten my name, but its debts hadn't. And that, I realized, was how a builder reclaimed what he'd lost, not through noise, but through design. Some victories arrive without applause. They come quietly, through signatures, patience, and the steady rhythm of a pen scratching across paper. 3 days after my meeting with George, I sat in the polished conference room of Halverson Financial Group. The windows overlooked the river, the kind of view that made people forget who paid for it. The banker across from me, a young man named Ellis, adjusted his cufflinks and smiled like someone trained to sound trustworthy. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I must admit, when I saw your name on the inquiry, I thought it was a coincidence. You're the Cole, then? The Foundation's namesake?" I smiled thinly. "Once upon a time." He glanced at the folder between us. "You understand that the Cole Initiative has 3 active loans with us, one of them under review for default." "I understand," I said. "And you want to purchase the debt outright?" "Yes." He hesitated. "Forgive me for asking, sir, but what's your interest in a charity's debt?" "Sentimental," I said. "I helped build it. I'd rather see it restored than repossessed." He studied me for a long second, then shrugged. "Money talks, Mr. Cole. We don't judge motives." The papers were ready within an hour. Legal transfer documents, promissory notes, digital authorization codes. I signed each one slowly, my pen steady, the sound crisp against the silence. When it was over, Ellis extended his hand. "Congratulations! As of now, you hold controlling interest in the Cole Initiative's outstanding liabilities." I stood, buttoning my coat. "Sometimes the best way to rebuild something is to start from the foundation up." He smiled politely, not understanding. Few people ever did. That evening I met George at our usual diner. The neon sign flickered overhead, bathing the booth in tired red light. He had a manila envelope waiting beside his coffee. "It's done," I said. "I saw the transfer notice come through," he replied. "You now own the charity's debt, and by extension, its future." I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl darken. "Feels strange." "Power always does when it's earned honestly," George said. "Now comes the part where patience builds pressure." He slid the envelope across. Inside were the details of the next step, a board meeting scheduled for the end of the month. The foundation would be forced to address its debt obligations. "That's when they'll find out," I said. He nodded. "Not before. Let them keep smiling. It'll make the silence louder when it breaks." The days that followed felt like standing on scaffolding over a half-built bridge, each move measured, deliberate. Megan called once, cautiously. "Mr. Cole, I heard something about a new investor acquiring the Foundation's debt," she said. I kept my tone even. "Rumors move faster than truth, Ms. Shaw." "I just hope whoever's behind it knows what they're doing." "They do," I said, and hung up gently. Lying never sat well with me, but in that moment, truth needed time. Even a good structure requires silence before the reveal. The morning mail brought a thick envelope addressed to Isabel Cole, director. The lender's notice now bearing my company's name, C&H Development Holdings. The initials were deliberate, Cole and Helen. No one but me would ever know. I stared at the logo on the letterhead for a long moment before tucking it into a larger envelope and sending it to the Foundation's registered office. The message was simple, professional, and devastating. Effective immediately, the financial oversight of all Cole Initiative assets and debts will be managed under new ownership. Further correspondence will be directed to C&H Development Holdings. No threat, no flourish, just structure. By dusk, I stood outside the glass building again. The reflection of the sunset turned it copper, warm on the surface, hollow underneath. Inside, silhouettes moved, Isabel, Nathan, their staff, unaware that every light in that building now ran on money I controlled. For a moment, I wondered if Helen would approve. Then I remembered what she'd said during our last project together. "You can't fix a roof by shouting at the rain, Ray. You fix it by going inside." I whispered into the evening, "I'm inside now, Helen." And for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt like a builder again. The morning of the board meeting felt like standing at the edge of a completed bridge, waiting to test its first weight. I arrived early, old habit. Builders measure twice, arrive first, and watch how others walk in. The Coal Initiative's conference room sat on the top floor, all glass and echo. The skyline looked sharp enough to cut you if you stared too long. I chose a seat near the window and waited, hands folded, posture still. People trickled in, donors, advisors, PR staff. Polite nods, paper coffee cups, whispers about budgets. Then came Isabel. Tailored navy suit, hair perfect, voice smooth as press releases. She didn't see me at first. When she did, her expression flickered. Confusion, then calculation. "Dad," she said quietly, as if the word might stain the air. "Why are you here?" "I was invited," I said. Her brow tightened. "By whom?" "By the Foundation's creditors," I replied. Apparently they thought I should attend. She didn't understand yet. That was fine. Truth, like architecture, reveals itself in stages. Nathan strode in next, confident, phone in hand, handshake ready for the world. "Raymond," he said, feigning warmth, "didn't expect you here. We're about to discuss some restructuring. Nothing personal." "Everything about this is personal," I said. Before he could answer, the meeting began. The chairwoman, a donor named Lydia Hart, cleared her throat. As you all know, the Foundation's loans were recently consolidated under new ownership. The lender will now brief us on the terms. Her assistant passed out folders. The logo on the first page gleamed in the light. C&H Development Holdings. The initials meant nothing to them. Not yet. Nathan flipped through the packet, frowning. "Who are these people? Why haven't I heard of this firm?" "Because you never looked beneath the surface," I said. The room quieted. All eyes turned toward me. Isabel's voice broke the silence. "Dad, what is this?" I stood slow and steady and laid my copy of the documents on the table. "It's structure," I said. "It's accountability. It's ownership." I met Nathan's stare. C&H Development Holdings purchased every outstanding debt tied to the Coal Initiative last week, which means, I turned toward my daughter, the building, the accounts, the brand, even the name, now fall under my authority. The silence that followed was absolute, a perfect architectural stillness. Isabel's lips parted, but no sound came. Nathan tried to speak first. "This is absurd. You can't just—" "I can," I said, sliding the notarized transfer across the table. And I did, all legal, all quiet. You might call it restoration work. Lydia Hart read the documents aloud, her voice trembling at the official seals. "It's legitimate. Mr. Cole now holds majority control." Whispers broke out around the room. Shock, curiosity, faint admiration. Nathan's face reddened. "You went behind our backs." "I went beneath your foundation," I said. "That's where the cracks were." Isabel finally found her voice, but it was softer than I remembered. "Why, Dad? To humiliate me?" I looked at her, not angry, not triumphant, just tired. "To remind you what you built this on. It wasn't marble and press conferences, it was your mother's dream. You turned it into a mirror." Her eyes shone, not with tears yet, but with the realization of exposure. Nathan slammed his folders shut. "You can't run this organization without me. The donors are mine." "No," I said. "They were bought with borrowed decency. You might find it's harder to finance that now." He stood, muttering something about lawyers, and stormed out. The door closed behind him with a thud that sounded almost rehearsed. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Isabel said quietly, "You've ruined everything." "No," I said. "I just stripped away what was already rotten. You can rebuild, if you remember why it mattered." She looked down, voice barely a whisper. "I don't even know where to start." "Start at the ground," I said. "That's where your mother always began." When the meeting adjourned, I walked out into the corridor, alone. Through the glass wall, the city stretched wide and bright, unbothered by human pride. Behind me, I heard Megan's voice. "Mr. Cole?" I turned She stood by the elevator, eyes steady. You did it. I just reclaimed the blueprint, I said. She smiled faintly. Then maybe the building can stand again. I nodded, pressing the elevator button. Let's hope so. Otherwise, we'll draw another. The doors closed, sealing the room behind me. And with it, the noise of ego collapsing into silence. When people talk about collapse, they usually picture noise. The crash of metal, the shout, the chaos. But some collapses happen quietly. Just a breath leaving a room. A pause that doesn't end. The Foundation's office looked different the next week. The usual chatter had dulled. The air was cautious. Word had spread faster than any press release. The coal initiative had changed hands. I didn't announce anything publicly. I didn't need to. Truth has its own echo. Still, I came that morning because silence can be dangerous too. It leaves space for rumors to grow. As I stepped inside, the receptionist looked at me with a mix of respect and fear. Good morning, Mr. Cole. Ms. Isabel is in her office. I nodded. Thank you. Her door was half open. Isabel sat at her desk, hands around a coffee cup gone cold, staring at her reflection in the window. When she saw me, she straightened, her tone flat, but polite. You won. I didn't come to win, I said. I came to work. Her laugh was dry. That's rich, considering you just took everything. I took responsibility, I said quietly. You left it lying around. She looked away, her eyes rimmed red. On the shelf behind her sat a framed photo of Helen, smiling, paintbrush in hand. Someone had dusted it recently. Do you remember when she made us repaint the east wall? 3 times because the color wasn't warm enough? I asked. Isabel blinked. Yeah. She said people needed to feel welcome before they even stepped inside. She believed a place could carry love, I said. But somewhere along the way, this one started carrying fear. Her shoulders sagged. I tried, Dad. After she died, I wanted to make it bigger, better. I thought if it looked successful, people would believe it mattered. And did they? She hesitated. For a while. Silence hung between us. Not angry, just heavy. Finally, I said, Your mother's name still sits on that plaque downstairs. It deserves to mean something again. I want you to help me rebuild this place. But not for donors, for people. She looked up sharply. You'd still trust me? After everything? Trust isn't a door you lock forever, I said. Sometimes it's just one you leave cracked open, so light can come back through. For the first time in months, I saw my daughter soften. The pride in her face loosened into something fragile. Human. I don't deserve that, she whispered. No one does, I said. That's why it's grace. Later that day, Megan met me in the atrium. The space looked brighter, though the weather hadn't changed. I heard you spoke to her, she said. I did, I replied. How'd it go? Like watching glass shift in the sun. You don't know whether it's breaking or clearing. Megan smiled faintly. Maybe both. We walked through the main hall, stopping beneath Helen's bronze plaque. Someone, maybe Isabel, had polished it until it gleamed. George says the audit's almost complete, Megan said. Once the false vendors are cleared, the finances will stabilize. Good, I said. The structure's sound. It just needed honesty poured back into the cracks. She looked at me curiously. What'll you do then? Stay in charge? I paused. No, just long enough to make sure it stands on its own. Builders should never live inside their work. That evening I sat in my car outside the Foundation's building. Through the glass I could see Isabel talking with volunteers, her hands moving, her expression calmer. The light behind her turned the glass into a mirror, but this time I saw both of us reflected. For years I thought my job as a father ended when my wife died, but now, watching my daughter start over, I realized it had only been waiting, like an unfinished blueprint rediscovered in an old drawer. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, as if the city were exhaling. I started the engine, but didn't drive yet. Instead, I whispered what Helen used to say whenever we finished a project. Leave something better than you found it. That line had built everything. Our homes, our marriage, our daughter's heart. And now, finally, it was building again. You can learn a lot about people by watching how they handle broken things. Some pretend the cracks aren't there, others cover them with decoration, and then there are the few who pick up a trowel, roll up their sleeves, and start repairing, even when they know it'll never look the same again. That's how the rebuilding began. No press, no announcement, no donors shaking hands for cameras. Just work, the kind Helen would have called the good kind of noise. For the first time in years, Isabel showed up at the foundation early. She wore jeans and a paint-splattered hoodie instead of a tailored suit. I almost didn't recognize her when she walked into the dusty storage room where I was sorting old blueprints. "You actually came?" I said, half smiling. She brushed her hair behind her ear, eyes uncertain. "I figured if you're giving me another chance, I'd better earn it." "Then grab a pair of gloves," I said. "We've got more cracks than we've got plaster." The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm. Boxes, cleaning, repainting. The building began to feel less like an office and more like a workshop again. Volunteers returned. Megan coordinated supplies. Even George stopped by, muttering about numbers finally matching the heart. There was a quiet joy in it. We scrubbed floors where Helen once taught art classes, reopened storage rooms that hadn't seen sunlight in years. Each nail, each brushstroke felt like forgiveness, expressed in motion. Sometimes Isabel and I worked side by side in silence. Other times, she asked questions about her mother, small, gentle ones, like testing the strength of a beam before trusting it again. "What was she like when you first met her?" she asked one afternoon, scraping old paint off a wall. "Loud," I said, smiling, not in voice, but in conviction. She could walk into an empty lot and see a future standing there. Isabel nodded. I wish I remembered that version of her better. "You can still find her," I said. "She's in every wall we built." That line caught her off guard. She looked at the half-painted wall and whispered, "Then maybe she's forgiving me too." I didn't answer. Some truths need space to echo on their own. The first public event after the rebuild was a modest open house. No red carpets, no photographers. Just the community Helen had dreamed of serving. Children drew on the new classroom walls. Elderly volunteers handed out cookies. A choir from the local school sang softly near the entrance. I stood near the doorway, watching Isabel greet people, genuinely not for show. Her smile looked unpolished, and for the first time in a long while, that made it beautiful. Megan came over and handed me a clipboard. "You did it," she said. "We did," I replied, "and we're not done." She nodded. "Still, seeing her like this? It's something." "It's Helen's doing," I said. "She was always better at mending hearts than I was." Megan smiled. "Maybe you're learning." Later, when everyone had gone home, Isabel and I stayed behind to clean. The lights hummed softly above us. She stopped at the main hallway and looked at the bronze plaque again, the one bearing her mother's name. "Dad," she said quietly, "I want to add another line under Mom's inscription." "What would it say?" She handed me a small brass plate she'd already ordered. The engraving read, "Rebuilt with grace, for those who fell and stood again." I stared at it, feeling my throat tighten. "Your mother would have liked that." "I hope so," she whispered, "because I finally understand what she meant by building with love." I helped her attach it beneath the original plaque. When the screws tightened, the sound echoed like punctuation, an ending that was really a beginning. We stood there for a long while without speaking. The hall lights reflected in the polished metal, two silhouettes side by side. Maybe forgiveness doesn't erase what's broken. Maybe it just teaches you how to hold the pieces differently. Either way, the walls were standing again, and so were we. Peace has a way of testing people. Sometimes it's not the storm itself that destroys you. It's the silence before it, convincing you the clouds are gone for good. 3 months passed since the rebuild. The foundation was thriving again, smaller, humbler, but alive. Children's laughter filled the new classrooms. Donors who once chased prestige now sent quiet checks without fanfare. Even the neighborhood around us seemed to breathe easier. I had started spending fewer hours at the building, letting Isabel lead. She was different now, patient, grounded. Sometimes I caught glimpses of her mother in her posture, the way she tilted her head while listening. But one Tuesday morning, the wind shifted. Megan called just after sunrise. "Ray," she said, her voice tight, "you might want to come in." "What happened?" "There's someone in the lobby asking to see you. Nathan Ellery." The name landed like thunder. When I arrived, Nathan was pacing near the entrance. Same expensive suit, same arrogance, but now it looked worn, like he'd been living in the same clothes too long. "Raymond," he said, forcing a smile, "you look well." I could say the same, but it'd be a lie. He chuckled awkwardly. Still the same sharp tongue. "What do you want, Nathan?" He hesitated, eyes darting around. "To make things right." "That depends on how you define right." He exhaled. "Look, I messed up. I got greedy. But I didn't start this alone. Isabel knew how the books worked." I stared at him for a long second. "Careful," I said softly. "You're confusing survival with betrayal. She's paying for what she did. Are you?" His jaw tightened. "I lost everything. The contracts, the investors. All gone after you took over. You ruined me." "No," I said calmly. "You ruined yourself. I just stopped you from taking the rest of us with you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think this is over? You think buying that debt made you the hero? Wait until people hear how you tricked your own daughter." I didn't move. "You won't win this time, Nathan. There's nothing left to steal," he sneered. "We'll see about that." Then he turned and walked out. Not with power, but with desperation, like a man trying to convince himself he still mattered. Megan approached cautiously. "Should I call security?" "No," I said. "Let him carry his ghosts. They're heavier than anything we could hand him." That evening, Isabel found me sitting in Helen's old art room, the one we'd restored with fresh paint and a long window facing the river. "I heard he came," she said. "He did. What did he want?" "Relevance," she sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "He called me last week, too. Wanted money. I told him no." "Good. I wanted to tell you," she continued, "but I didn't want to bring his poison back into this place." I looked up at her. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I know some storms don't need fighting, they just need outlasting." For a long moment, we sat in silence, watching the light fade over the river. The reflection of the foundation shimmered on the glass like a living memory. Solid, but still learning to breathe again. That weekend I walked through the city alone. The air carried that same pre-rain smell that once haunted me. Only this time I wasn't afraid of it. I'd learned that storms come and go. What matters is what still stands afterward. At a small coffee shop, I saw a familiar face. The janitor from that old school Helen and I built decades ago. He recognized me instantly. "Mr. Cole, haven't seen you in a while. Heard your foundation's back up." "It is," I said, smiling, "and stronger than before." He nodded. "My mom used to say, a good man doesn't hide from the rain. He just keeps fixing the roof." I laughed. "Sounds like something my wife would have said." "She must have been a good one." "The best," I said softly. When I stepped back outside, a few drops of rain landed on my hand. Instead of pulling up my collar, I let them fall. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like something ending. It felt like cleansing. The first morning of spring arrived with a soft light that filled every room of the foundation. The rain had stopped, leaving the air washed and bright. For once the city felt quiet, not heavy, not hollow, just finished. I stood in the main hallway of the Cole Initiative, looking at the new inscription beneath Helen's plaque. "Rebuilt with grace, for those who fell and stood again." The brass gleamed in the morning sun. Isabel had polished it herself. Each word caught light like it was alive. I touched the cool metal and whispered, "You'd like this, Helen. She's found her way home." Over the past few months, I'd started keeping fewer hours at the office. Isabel had taken full control: the finances, the planning, even the community outreach programs. And unlike before, it wasn't about image anymore. It was about impact. Every week she'd visit schools, food shelters, small art centers, the same places her mother once loved. The city started whispering her name again, but this time it wasn't with gossip. It was with gratitude. Megan became her right hand. George finalized the last audit, then framed the official letter of clearance. Everything Helen had dreamed of, order, honesty, service, had found its form again. And I had started sketching again. Not blueprints for buildings this time, but for peace. Small watercolor studies of places Helen and I once built together. I'd forgotten how calming the sound of pencil on paper could be. It reminded me that creation doesn't always need to stand tall. Sometimes it can just exist. One afternoon, Isabel stopped by my workshop. She still had paint on her hands from a volunteer event, something Helen used to do the same way. She looked around at my scattered sketches and smiled. "You're drawing again." "Trying," I said. "My lines are slower these days." "Mom used to say your best work came when you weren't thinking about perfection." "She was right," I said softly. She walked over to the table, studying one of the drawings. A small church Helen and I built 40 years ago, the one where we'd first learned to argue and agree at the same time. "It's strange," Isabel said. "When I was younger, I thought strength meant never admitting mistakes. But now, I think it's the opposite." "It is," I said. "You can't rebuild anything without first admitting what broke." She turned toward me, her voice quieter. "You taught me that, even when I didn't deserve it," I smiled. "You're your mother's daughter, Isabel. That was never in question." She laughed, brushing her eyes. "You really are leaving, aren't you?" I nodded. "It's time. Builders don't live in their blueprints. They just make sure the walls stand without them." That weekend we held a small ceremony. Not a gala, not a press event, just a quiet handover. Volunteers gathered in the courtyard. Children sang a simple hymn Helen once loved. When Isabel took the stage, she spoke without notes. "My father taught me that walls don't hold meaning, people do. And my mother taught me that love is the only foundation that lasts. Today we rebuild, not for applause, but for purpose." The crowd clapped softly. No flashing cameras, no speeches, just warmth. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. This place was built by a woman who believed that every hand mattered. My only job was to make sure her voice was never lost in the noise. I stepped aside and let Isabel stand where Helen once did. The sunlight hit her face, and for a moment it felt like time folded in on itself. Mother, daughter, builder, one continuous design. That night, after everyone left, I walked alone through the now empty hall. The walls still smelled faintly of paint and new beginnings. I stopped under the plaque again and whispered, "You were right, Helen. Love was the foundation. I just forgot how deep it went." Outside, the evening sky blushed with the last color of sunset. The river reflected gold, calm, sure, endless. For the first time in years, I felt ready to put down my tools. Not because the work was over, but because it finally stood on its own. Some stories don't end. They just find a quiet place to rest. And for the first time in a long while, I think mine has found one. The house feels different these days. Not empty. Just quiet in a way that doesn't ache anymore. The kind of quiet that listens instead of accuses. Every morning I still wake before dawn, make my coffee the way Helen used to. Too strong, too early, and sit by the drafting table. Only now the papers spread across it aren't blueprints for buildings. They're letters I'll never send. Today one lies half-finished. The pencil lines are faint, the edges soft from where my hand rested too long. At the top of the page I've written her name, Helen, My love, you'd be proud of her. Of Isabel. She finally built something real, not with steel or marble, but with grace. She laughs more now. Sometimes I catch her looking at your photo like she's talking to you. Maybe she is. Maybe we both are. I pause, glance out the window. The river glints in the sunlight. Slow, patient, unchanged. The same way it looked on the day we poured the first foundation together, when our hands were younger and our dreams bigger than sense. You always said every line drawn in faith leaves a mark, even when time erases the paper. Maybe that's what we were. Just lines that lasted longer than we had any right to. The words blur slightly as my eyes sting, but I keep writing. She's running the foundation now, not for cameras or praise, for people. You'd like the way she talks to them, softly with her hands, not her pride. The volunteers call her Mrs. Cole's daughter again. I think that's the highest title anyone could earn. I set the pencil down. The sun has climbed high enough to fill the room. Dust floats in the light like memory made visible. On the corner of the table lies your wedding ring. I still keep it near, not out of grief, but gratitude. I pick it up, trace its circle, and whisper, "We did it, Helen. We built something that stood." Outside, a faint knock pulls me back. Isabel steps in, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Brought you one," she says. "Smells better than mine ever did," I reply, smiling. She looks around the workshop, the scattered sketches, the open window, the soft hum of peace. "It's different in here," she says. "Lighter." "That's what happens when you finish something," I say. "The air forgives you." She laughs softly and sits beside me. For a while, neither of us speaks. The silence feels shared, not lonely. Finally, she looks at the letter on the table. "Is that for Mom?" "It is," I say. "It's my last draft." "Are you going to send it?" "Already did," I whisper, pointing upward. "Postal service is slow, but reliable." She smiles through glassy eyes. "She'd be proud of you, Dad." I shake my head gently. "She'd be proud of us. Builders don't work alone." We sit like that, father and daughter, sunlight wrapping around us like the quiet applause of time. That evening, after she leaves, I open the window wider. The spring air drifts in, carrying faint laughter from the street below. The same sound that used to fill the community center decades ago. I fold the letter carefully, place it beneath Helen's photograph, and blow out the lamp. The room dims, but it doesn't feel dark. Because some structures don't need light to stand. They just need love strong enough to hold their shape. Outside, the river keeps flowing, steady, sure, eternal. And for the first time since she left, I let myself believe this isn't an ending. It's just the last beautiful line on the blueprint